Flights are pricey, planning feels chaotic, and that trip that keeps getting pushed because you're too busy or travel's too expensive. Welcome to Points, Cards, and Travel. I'm Ross, the founder of Itinerary Boss. I've made the mistakes of doing this for 10 plus years so you don't have to. Each week, you'll get practical tools, point strategies, and expert guests with real use cases so you can travel better for way less using points and miles. Quick thing before we bring on our guests, if you're new here, go ahead and grab my free 5 step roadmap to your next free 5 star luxury vacation and the one card that gets you there, which you can find in the show notes. Now, let's bring on our guest and get into it. Welcome back to another episode of World Travel Made Easy. On this week's episode, I'm excited to have on Kenny Hansen. He's the founder and CEO of MentorPass, a platform that connects entrepreneurs with mentors who've built brands like Bloom Nutrition, Louis Vuitton, Native Deodorant, and Athletic Greens. After working for 6 years in Washington, D.C., he moved to Bali to start building MentorPass to help business owners grow smarter. And today we're going to dive into his story and lessons learned. You're going to want to make sure you stick around until the end to hear his secret and where he'll share everything he's learned from working with some of the top 1% e-commerce and retail experts. How's it going today, Kenny?
It's going great, Ross. How are you?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Can't complain. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, of course, man. We had a great conversation. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and I'm really excited about everything you're doing. And I think we talked about the overlap between our potential audiences. I think my current audience can be largely your audience in terms of the service you provide is so relevant to everyone in the e-commerce space. So I'm excited about this collaboration and sharing some insights from my side and also learning more from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned, when you said you moved to Bali when you were working on Mentor Pass, really wanted to just share that and how that overlaps from a travel perspective, but don't want to sell you short. So would love just to learn a little bit more about, what Mentor Pass is and how it helps entrepreneurs and business owners.
Yeah, so to explain Mentor Pass, it's probably helpful to take a step back and talk about my journey prior to that. And so there were two primary influences that went into building Mentor Pass. One was my personal journey. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I went to Oakton High School. I didn't go to Oakton High School that often because I was often absent. I was a bit of a bad kid, a troublemaker, mixed up in the wrong things, and actually ended up failing out my senior year of high school and was written off by many people as a lost cause. But I slowly started to turn my life around. After high school, I moved down to Blacksburg, Virginia. I went to a community college, graduated from that community college quickly, and went to Virginia Tech. Finished with honors and ended up going into a great career in consulting. And I paused to look at that kind of turnaround and transformation that I had in my life. And I recognized that it wouldn't have been possible without the incredible mentors that I had. Football coaches, friends, parents that really helped me a lot and taught me a lot along the way. And I recognized that I was very privileged to have this experience growing up in Northern Virginia and that not everyone had access to mentorship like I did. And so it became my mission in life to democratize access to that same type of relationship that I was lucky to have. And so in 2019, I came up with the idea of basically Airbnb for mentors so that everyone could get access to it. You didn't have to come from a great area or go to a great school or get into a big startup accelerator. So at its core, our mission at Mentor Pass is to help connect people with folks that can help them achieve their goals, turn their life around, turn their business around. And then the second side of that story was, once I turned my life around, I went and I worked at Accenture, which is the biggest consulting firm in the world, about $60 billion in revenue and almost 1 million employees. And what I recognized being inside of that big, huge consulting firm was that consulting was changing just like every other industry was changing. And the same way that you had Uber that was disrupting transportation and Airbnb that was disrupting hospitality, there was going to be a digital first consulting platform that came along and disrupted the Accentures, the Deloittes, the McKinseys. And I said, somebody's going to build this. And then I asked myself the simple question, why not me? I was very passionate about it. I had that core passion at my core to build something that helped people, and I learned so much about the kind of process of consulting. And so those two influences came together to form this business called Mentor Pass, which today is like, Mentor Pass, Class Pass for mentors. You sign up on our platform. We have over 500 mentors on the platform that we've selected out of 10,000 applications, and we'll connect you with the best people in the world that can help you solve your problems. We work with primarily consumer brands, e-commerce businesses, and we help them with growth marketing, with brand strategy, with fundraising and finance, as well as supply chain operations, everything across the board. We work with small early stage businesses and multi-hundred-million-dollar a year companies, and can help not only the founder and the CEO, but everyone all the way down through the analyst level. So that's a little bit about the business today, and I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit more of the stories and the texture of it, but that's just kind of a quick overview.
Yeah, no, I love it. I appreciate you sharing that background. I know when we got connected, obviously we have some mutual connections, having those Northern Virginia, DC roots and going to Radford and you going to Virginia Tech. So it's always cool to hear that side of the story. But I also there's a book called The Upstarts just around Airbnb and Uber. So I love the fact that you had that thought process of why not me, right? Why not, why I already have this, experience in the consulting area. Why not go and do that? And just similarly, like mentors throughout my early 20s, and I mean throughout obviously college, high school, sports, and 20s was very helpful just from asking the questions of, hey, like you've done this for, and I'm corporate America and the software medical device field, like you've done this for this many years. Like, what are some things, what specifically on that side would you were your biggest like regrets? What would you do? And that always just helped being a sponge and doing that. But that was obviously in when you're in a corporate job. So then when you get outside and you start to build something on your own, it's like, okay, who has done this? How do I, because you're always going to make mistakes. I think that's when we got connected. And now I'm working with some people on your team. Like it is truly valuable because when you start to work with those people who have already done it successfully, like they can tell you, hey, do this is who you need to talk to. You just build that type of community. And I love the fact that you guys only take in a certain number of those because you're getting the best of the best, and you're also not just taking right 500 who are all in the same field. You're finding, hey, what are the questions about? So no, that's awesome, man. I appreciate you sharing some of that background.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, I mean, my thought is these consulting businesses are so big because they work. They do solve problems, and they help companies grow. And for me, the thought is, why is that only accessible to Fortune 500 companies? Why do you have to be a $1 billion business to get access to expertise? And I really believe that technology is a great facilitator for like democratization. It used to be a very exclusive group of people that could call a black car service and had a private driver. And Uber made it so that everyone had their own private driver. And Mentor Pass is really doing the same thing. It used to be, if you're a big Fortune 500 company, getting access to experts is no big deal because you've always had access to it. But if you're a $10 million a year e-commerce brand, getting access to that top 1% of expertise is something that's really revolutionary because you haven't had access to those folks in the past. And whether that you're an e-commerce entrepreneur or whether you're trying to leave the corporate world to go build your first business, getting access to the right people can make or break your success. And so for me, it's just all about how do we open the door and let other people in? When you're given a privilege in life, how can you give more people access to it?
Yeah, 100%. I think you always learn after you've done it. It's like I wish I just had that person that would have told me to do this, and I would have just paid them, and it would have saved me so much more time and money in the long run. I think if you are just getting started out, or right, you're earlier in your stage, like what Mentor Pass is providing is truly valuable, and I can tell you just from the conversations with Kenny. But want to dive into just the travel piece because right, we just when I heard the story of you went to Bali when you were working on everything, we just went for our honeymoon, and I feel like you always hear a lot of stories just around that getting started, and it's always seems that Bali is one of those places. So would just love to hear a little bit more about that story and how do you feel like travel has influenced you as a founder?
If this episode's helping you out, could you hit that follow or subscribe button and also leave a quick 5-star rating wherever you're listening?
So I remember how it all first started. I was sitting at my desk. It was 2018. I was still working at Accenture, and I came across this article from Condé Nast, and it said digital nomads from around the world are flocking to this beach in Bali. And the photo was of this place that I ended up frequenting called The Lawn. It's in Canggu. It's a very popular beach bar. And it was the coolest photo I'd ever seen. And just the copywriting was so good. I was like, I want to be one of those people. And so I sent it around to a couple of friends, Mark Wilkinson, Brian Evan Marco, Megan Reardon, a couple of others, and organized a group. There were 10 of us. We took a trip to Bali for the first time. It was the first time I had been there. And we rented a villa for our first few days, and we shared there was two private villas that shared a pool. And we were in one villa, and in the other villa, it was a bunch of guys that had lived in Bali for a couple of years. And they were the coolest guys you could imagine. They were photographers, they had clothing brands, they had the whole entire life that you wanted. They all had a bunch of social media followers. And I was talking to one of the guys, Omera, one day in the pool, and Omera was telling me a story. He said, I'm Italian Israeli. I went to school in New York. I went to NYU. I played soccer there, and then I went to go work at a big hedge fund. And he said he was at the hedge fund for a couple of years. He was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, just a few years out of school. And he had the life that everybody would dream of, living in New York City, making a ton of money, working in finance. And he said that one day it hit him. He said, it doesn't matter how much money you give me if you take all of my time. Money is an infinite resource. Time is a finite resource. And as someone who was used to trading, he was like, this is a bad trade that I'm trading all of my time for money. And so at that point, he made the decision that he was going to leave the finance world, leave his hedge fund, and go start traveling and enjoying his time more. And so we finished our trip with our friends, and I went back to my corporate job. I went back to the cubicle in LaFont Plaza in Washington, D.C. And almost every day I thought about that conversation. And I was like, I'm trading all of my time for money. This is a bad trade. And just about a year later, I finally decided, you know what? I'm going to have the courage to do what Omera did. And I'm going to leave my stable, safe corporate job, and I'm going to move to Bali. And so, late 2019, I moved. I took a sabbatical from Accenture. I had the idea for MentorPass, and I wanted to start working on it. And so I picked Bali for a couple of reasons, and it was a great decision for a couple of reasons. One, it's much cheaper. I think I had a place in Bali for maybe $400, $500 a month for a nice apartment. In Washington, D.C., I think I was paying $2,200 a month. So if you've got, let's say $50,000 in savings at $2,000 a month on just rent, plus the food cost, plus everything else, that doesn't last nearly as long as if you can drop your actual burn rate and reduce your spend. And so the cost of living was much cheaper, which allowed me to actually have a little bit more flexibility when it came to building the business. Number two, the talent density is really, really high there. And it's not only a talent density, the creativity. Almost everyone there, I won't say, yeah, almost everyone, maybe 70% of people there are working for themselves. And most of them are solo entrepreneurs, creating content on social media and selling some course or life coaching or something like that. Anyways, it's unimportant what the business model is. The important thing is I was coming from a company that had 1 million employees and all the infrastructure you could imagine. So for me to get out of my comfort zone and say, I'm going to leave this big, safe, comfortable place that gives me everything I need and jump into the land of nobody knows what the hell they're doing and they just have to figure it out, that was extremely helpful for me. And when you go to the co-working spaces, you go to all the community spots, almost every day they had some type of networking event or educational event where AWS was in town, or now it's probably OpenAI and Anthropic that are all trying to get you to build on their stack. But anyways, there were all of these educational opportunities and networking opportunities to meet other entrepreneurs that could help you build whatever it is that you were trying to build. And then lastly, I think it was also helpful for me to kind of reset my identity, because my identity was largely based in my resume. I worked for a big prestigious company, and so I would, meet someone and say, "Oh, I work for Accenture." Like, "Oh, that's impressive. You must be a good guy." You go to Bali, no one cares, and so it was helpful to get away from the resume and really rebuild my entire character around, who are you in this moment? What can you do for me? Not, what does it say on your resume? And that was just really helpful to be able to break down my identity, break down my value system in terms of I really care about what people think about me. The prestige of the company that I work for really matters to, rebuilding myself as this new person who is much more risk forward, much more independent thinking. And so there were three great reasons to move there, and I lived there for probably about almost a year, and then COVID started. And so I moved back to the US, then eventually moved to Mexico City, and then New York, Miami, and then Austin, Texas, and now we're here in Europe. And so it's been a transition throughout the time, but Bali was a really critical step that, I couldn't have picked a better place to get started.
I love no, that's cool. I love the second piece around just going there and you kind of had you had a mini mentor pass within everything, right? Where I mean, because it is true, when you create something new from the ground up, like, being in corporate and being at big companies, like I said on the front end, like you have the mentors who have done that and they can give you the advice from the inside of looking at it from that perspective. But from all of that and not having those processes, not having that, like that's huge. And right, like yeah, I really like that, like that part of the story. Because yeah, I mean, you're just surrounding yourself with the right people, and it's that's funny. You're spot on with someone's coaching, course creators, creating content. That's what you see every time you look at Bali, which is too good. And yeah, it's very inexpensive. I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize is once you get your money goes a lot further. So if you do travel there, you're spending a fifth on rent, like you wouldn't be in DC. And yeah, just changing your identity. I think that's one thing for you've obviously traveled, but I think a lot of the times that's one goal that I always have with people is if you haven't traveled, it's just like get out there and you'll learn a lot about yourself. Even if you're working in a corporate job and you realize, okay, like I just need some time off, and this might give you different creative juices to then go create something, or it may just give you that, needed vacation that's going to help from burnout. And, those are things over 10 plus years of just group travel, planning trips, traveling for work that I realize. And, it just is a compound effect that really helps you start to get ideas of like, okay, this is what I should be doing. This is how I should be building. So no, I love that story, and it relates to a lot of, everything you're doing at MentorPass and ties in nicely.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality is there was another element of that was after 6 years at Accenture, I was burnt out. I had been putting on a suit and tie every day and schlepping to the metro and DC humidity in the summer and going down to LaFont Plaza to work in a government building for 6 years. That did a number on my psyche. And so going there to Bali, which was a beautiful place, I was not working hard at the beginning. I was barely, I'd be happy if I got 20 hours a week of work in. And most of the time I was doing yoga and healing my trauma and becoming more aware of my subconscious patterns and all of those things that allowed me to also reset and refresh myself. And so there was an element of burnout coming out of the corporate world that being there while I was working on the business, it was also a true sabbatical that was super helpful to kind of refresh myself before I went into this next chapter of kind of hardcore build mode.
That's awesome. I feel like yeah, I mean, we did our honeymoon this past April, and that was my 3 weeks before going into this full time from from my previous job. So it's definitely nice to there in Thailand. I mean, it's just nice where you're just unplugged. The 12-hour time difference is nice too, because then you're not in the social media, you're not in, texting, people, because you're on such a different time frame. So it does give you that peace of mind where you just can completely unplug.
I probably got back like maybe a day a week of my life when I moved there because I stopped watching sports. Every Sunday was prior to that was dedicated to football and Saturdays, college football. And then you move to the other side of the world and the games happen at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm sorry, but I'm not staying up. And so after living over there for a while, I came back and I was kind of like, damn, I broke my addiction. Now all of a sudden I'm back on this time zone and I have these Sundays all to myself because I have no real hooked to watch the Commanders play. I will say now, like after a handful of years back on this side of the world, I'm like, okay, it's Sunday, let's lock in. But for a while there, I completely stopped following sports, whether it's NFL, NBA, or anything else, which was interesting as well. I got a lot of time back, but like I said, now I'm back rooting for Jaden and the boys.
Well, yeah, I feel like you went at a perfect time when they were garbage, and then now, so now you took that sabbatical to make sure, right? Now they're actually back to being good. So that's too funny. Just from I mean, I like to focus in on this because similar to you, right? Being in the medical device field was on a road warrior on the road, like you said, in a suit, going into hospitals, staying in hotels 4 or 5 times a week. That's kind of how I learned the ins and outs of the airline hotel loyalty program, which led to building this and, optimizing credit card rewards points. But just on the burnout side, like, since you came from the corporate side and you tell that story, and now that you have Mentor Pass, like, are there specific struggles that you see just from, early stage entrepreneurs or just successful business owners from a burnout standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the word burnout used to be a lot more prominent in my day-to-day life. And as I've studied people that are really very successful, I'll have to be honest, like the word burnout just doesn't kind of exist in their mind. And it's really, really interesting. And I don't want to overemphasize this. It definitely, you get caught up in things, but I think one of the traits that makes some people so successful is they can work around the clock for a long time and just not get tired and not get burnt out. And I don't want to like, promote hustle culture too much and say that, but a lot of the people that I know that are really, really successful, they just work like crazy for a long stretch of time. And maybe they take some time off at the end once they sell their company. But then they're like, they get more burnt out from sitting on the beach and they want to go build another company. And so I hate to say, I don't know how much of that is just nature, where these people are just built different versus it's kind of a mentality. If you look at like a David Goggins mentality and like, just not letting that really come into your mind. But I don't know. It's really, really interesting. One of the traits that I've definitely found in some of the most successful people that I kind of study and get to know is they just, I mean, they can grind, and they definitely, I would say they have like a way of active resets and really quick resets. And so when they take time off, they take time off for real, and they spend it totally unplugged. So yeah, it's an interesting one because I think when you're first getting started in those early years and you're around a group of people and none of them are really getting to that next level, like everyone is talking about burnout, and I think maybe one of the things that contributes to burnout is a lack of progress. And when you study, and so maybe it's that these people are so great and that's why they don't get burnt out. Maybe the fact that they're having so much success is what stops them from getting burnt out. When you're winning every day, Tom Brady doesn't want to retire. When you play 10 years in the NFL and you never make it to the playoffs, you're like, you know what, my body's breaking down on me. And I think maybe the same principle applies in business, that when you start succeeding, you want to be working around the clock. When you're really in the grind, you're stuck in a rut and you've got to work 14-hour days for a bad reason. I think that's when it really starts to take a toll on you. And so I don't have a really clear answer on this, but it's an interesting pattern that I've noticed, that when I was talking more around, like, frankly, my peers that are in that early seven-figure range, everyone was like really having a hard time. And now that I've started to focus on our mentors and really building relationships with them and learning from them, it doesn't seem to be as much of a conversation. It's really just that they kind of block it out and say, hey, this is, that's emotional. Let's be analytical and talk about what we need to get done. So I know that that's probably a politically incorrect answer, but it's my observation at this moment in time, which could obviously change.
Yeah, no, I like that perspective because I think it's, and I heard that I was listening to My First Million yesterday, and they talk about, right, like if you love doing something, you're going to get up every day and you're willing to work around the clock, right? Like a Sunday, if you're waking up like every morning at 6:30, 5:30 and starting to work on something, you're excited about it. Like usually you're not going to get burnt out if you're, if you're working 14-hour days and not going to the gym, not sleeping, like that's a different story. But if you put all the right pieces into place, like, taking breaks, getting outside, going to the gym, like all of those things, from a healthy habit standpoint, you're probably not going to get burnt out because you're waking up and like, I love the Tom Brady analogy. You're just doing stuff that you love and you're consistently progressing. I think, and that's where when you go back to, hey, in my corporate days, and even for me, like we both were getting burnt out. I think that's also because you were doing something that sure you enjoyed, but it was for someone else and you weren't consistently growing and surrounding yourself with the people who, like you just mentioned, who are just like, hey, we're growing this, we're positive. You had sometimes just people who had negative attitudes and like you weren't surrounding yourself, like us both, sometimes you weren't surrounding yourself with those right type of people. And I think that's what allows you to level up and get past that burnout standpoint. And then obviously doing, like you said, taking those unplug resets. I mean, those are crucial, right? It's not like, oh, I'm leaving and then I'm going to work. It's no, I'm gone for 2, 3 weeks and I've put everything in place and worked my ass off to get here. And I have a team that's going to help take care of that while I'm gone so I can do what I need to do so I can come back refreshed and, get after it when I'm back.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I just sometimes think about it, and I'm like, if you think about maybe, some of our friends' parents that came here as immigrants, and they came here with very little to their names, and they worked tirelessly, multiple jobs, didn't speak the language, had to learn the language, and they worked around the clock, and they were probably exhausted. But I don't know if burnout would be, burnout is not an option
Yeah.
in those cases. And I think that when we look at ourselves in a case where it is an option because we could probably take some time off, the mentality is just very different. And I think that I have a lot of immigrant friends, and my spouse is not from the United States, and so you just hear from all these different cultures, and um, it's a different, the conversation of burnout is very interesting to me, where if it's not an option, then sometimes it doesn't come into your mind as much.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, you get to see it. Like, I like that you provided that background because you get to see it from all different perspectives and different cultures. It's not just, hey, I've traveled, I've been in the States this entire time and just seen that. It's no, I've gone around and been to different countries, worked in different countries, and been able to see it as well as, for your future wife, being able to see that as well. So that's pretty cool. Just from
Yeah,
a,
when you're you come to the US from India, and your parents growing up made $300 a month or $400 a month, and now you're in the US, and you have this opportunity to work as a software engineer, and you're making what they would make in a year. You're making that in a single month. And you're working around the clock, and you're not thinking about getting burnt out. You're thinking about how grateful you are for this opportunity. And I think that there's something about this position that we're in, that sometimes it creates a different kind of seed of thought in our minds, that I think if we can reframe ourselves into gratitude, then we can go a little bit longer and a little bit harder without kind of hitting that wall.
I love the perspective. I love that analogy too. I mean, it just in saying in just talking through, hey, someone's making this much. And when you travel, you get to see that. And like you said, when you go to Thailand or Bali or just other places where your dollar goes a lot further and you tip someone, $20 US dollars, they're like, oh my gosh, thank you. This is what I would have made sometimes in a day. So it is that's the one nice thing about travel is you start to learn those things and you get that different perspective that a lot of times if you don't go outside the states, right, you won't have. Just based on your like now that you've traveled a lot of places, right? You've gone over to Bali, Mexico City, throughout the states. How like as you've grown Mentor Pass, have your travel styles changed, or how do you look at it now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually very interesting because if I look at my journey, from just starting the business to as the business started to grow, I went from Southeast Asia, which was the cheapest place I lived, then a beach town in Mexico, which was a bit more expensive, to Mexico City, which was a bit more expensive, with now back to the US finally. And so it definitely had a pattern of like as the business grew and I was able to afford to pay myself a little bit, I could say, hey, let me, increase my budget from 4 to 500 a month. And so yeah, I think that I definitely I've learned a lot about working and traveling. I'll say that home base now is Austin, Texas, and we had a house there, and we're traveling for the next year for personal reasons as we go through my fiance's immigration process. We're going to do that from outside of the U.S., and so we're in Paris now, and we'll be traveling for the next year. But other than that, like Austin is home base, and that's where we'll head back to. And so I've settled, but I've learned a lot about working and traveling. Our kind of strategy for the next year is like what we would really call slow matting. It's like you're not moving that often. You're in a place for months at a time. We try to say like minimum 3 months, get a single place for that whole entire time. There can be real benefits in terms of productivity. Right now, I'm sitting in my office, and so here's what I'll say before we get to a place, I'll have my assistant like do a bunch of research on offices, private offices, and co-working spaces. We figure out which neighborhood we want to be in. So in Paris, we're living in Le Marais, which is a really cool, great restaurants and coffee shops. So that's where we want to be. We figure out where we want to be in the neighborhood, and then okay, let's find an office where we can get, I always like to have a private office because I don't like lugging my kind of setup back and forth every day in a backpack. And so let's look for an office where we can find. So office, maybe I think now I'm paying 800 euros a month for a couple of months while we're here. Buy a monitor, it costs you 150 bucks. You can get a proper setup. Buy a light setup. I think it was, 50 bucks, 70 bucks, and now I can do content and everything. My apartment is actually out the window right here. So I live on the same block that I work. And so the efficiency of getting to work is really, really easy. We have a gym that's a 10-minute walk from our house. And so we really just design our lives for my fiance is an entrepreneur as well. And so we work nonstop. We started work at 9 o'clock in the morning yesterday and worked until 1 o'clock in the morning. And so we're like, okay, what do we need to focus on? A house that's close to the office. Um, and so that's what I really look for. We're heading to Buenos Aires after this. There's great offices, great work culture. So we'll be looking for a similar setup there. So that's what I would say is like if you can get a co-working space or a private, like WeWork is amazing. There's WeWorks everywhere. They're really nice. So if you can get a private office and an apartment that are close to each other, then that's where you're going to be spending most of your time between that and the gym. So that's kind of our strategy now. At least 3 months, find an Airbnb that's close to the office so we can get back and forth pretty quickly, and obviously having a gym nearby as well.
Nice. No, that makes it simple. And I like how before you go, because I think a lot of people are like, how do I do this? And it's like, no, you have a plan, right? And for you, you guys want to be there for 3 months and being able to have the important things, like you said, a gym, having, and I didn't even think through that of just like getting an office where paying 800 bucks a month is not bad, or 800 euros a month isn't bad because, right, you're not having to work in maybe your 2 bedroom Airbnb where then you're like, okay, someone has calls here, someone has calls here, right? Because we've done that where we've gone on, a trip to Costa Rica and both worked or other places. And sometimes like that can be hard. So being able to just totally focus in, and especially if you're doing that slow travel is very important. I was at a conference last week and was talking with a mom family of four, and they travel a lot. And her whole thing is they go to Spain for half the year. And one of the reasons why is they do it slow, but also cost, daycare cost, summer camps cost, right? When you're living in places like North Virginia, summer camps cost are an arm and a leg. So it's like thinking through how do you, if you can have that plan in place and think through strategies, that's where you can offset a lot of the cost and just have a good setup where you're not getting out of your routine. So no, I love that insight, and that's super helpful for people who are wanting to travel, for more than a week and want to think, okay, how do I work remotely, on the road?
Yeah, and I think that, this has changed over time. And when I first started, like when I was in Bali, it was pretty much all cafes. Yeah, I had a co-working space there. but there was a lot of cafe work. And I think there's like levels between cafe work, co-working space, and then office work. And the productivity being in an office every day and having a setup, it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen Alex Hermosi in his little closet in his house. That's basically what I'm in right now. I'm
Yeah.
in a little closet. There's no distractions. There's nobody walking by. My productivity there is much, much higher than having to go to a coffee shop and find an outlet every day and worrying about taking calls because I talk loud. Those little things really add up, which is why now I'm very confident and comfortable to invest the extra money to say get an office instead of having to worry about getting set up every day. The extra, maybe 30 minutes a day, 2.5 hours a week, 10 hours a month. 10 hours a month is substantial when you're working on a business. And so that cost savings and that ROI starts to really add up. And so I think as you go from like just getting started in the travel work stuff to like now I consider myself at kind of a level advanced. I'm like, first thing I have to do is find an office. And if it's a co-working space, that's totally fine. If you can get a dedicated desk, that's great. But that has such a big impact. We also have this kind of like soft rule of no working from the house. Um, and it's a very soft rule. Like if I come home and she's taking a call, like I'm not upset or anything like that. But we try to do it for respect, out of respect for each other. Because if I'm, really having a hard day and I need to go take a nap or I need to just go home for lunch and clear my mind, and I walk in and she's on a call or vice versa, it really takes away kind of the sanctuary of the home.
Yeah.
And so that's why we both say, hey, for either of us, we should both have a spot to go work outside of the house so that when we go home, we know that home is home. And we both work from home sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's just another thing that I think adds to, the sustainability. I think like working while traveling, in order for it to be sustainable, it has to be very different from, I'm going for 2 weeks and we're going to work while we're traveling. Like you need to change from, hey, this is a short-term thing to you have to build habits to make it sustainable over the long term.
Yeah, 100%. And if you're gone for a year, 3 months, like you got to get into routine. And I
Mhm.
agree. I can't work out of a coffee shop, having a stool, like just sitting there for 8 hours, like your back is wrecked. And then and so paying that extra money is going to pay off in the long run, 100%. And I really like how you guys have that no working at home. Obviously, there's going to be some things, but just thinking through that too, I think that's a challenge too with remote work. Like I've always worked remote. My wife's office is we share a wall, but and we try once the day is over, like once 5:36 hits, like unless there's something that's like urgent, we try to be off our laptops, phones, all that. But I think if you don't, like that's one of the things nowadays where people who had never worked remote or weren't in like outside sales roles, like they're working even more. And I think that's what's causing a lot of just all the challenges that people are having. So that's no, I love that strategy. What about, so for you guys like to travel, any specific like strategies that you guys, well, first let me ask this, when you guys are staying in places, are you just getting Airbnbs? Like what size Airbnb do you feel like has worked best for you?
Yeah, so we're in Airbnbs almost all the time. And I wish I had a better solution. I do love Airbnb. I think it's a great business. I love the team and think, it's a great business and a great service for everyone. So I'm not a hater. But the reality is like it does add a lot of fees and expense to things. But there's just really not a better solution out there, especially when you're looking at international travel. The reality is every market is so different that you'll spend a ton of time trying to figure out what are the nuances of this market and how can I save 10%. And so for us, we basically just say, hey, I'll always go and Google search and say like, or ask ChatGPT, what's the local equivalent that's cheaper for Airbnb in Paris or something like that. But we're almost always doing the monthly stays on Airbnb, and the discounts for a
Mhm.
monthly stay are pretty significant. And so we will. Yeah, typically try to figure out which neighborhood we want to be in. And when it comes to picking cities, we're almost now at a point where we're like, if there's not a WeWork, we kind of won't consider it. And it's not that we're always working from WeWork, but it kind of signals like the level of infrastructure. And so when we look at cities, that's almost like a requirement now. Soho House is a benefit. If there's a Soho House also, it's like we can have those two, and those can be our two places that we go back and forth from. Um, and so now we're staying in it. We've got a one bedroom in Paris. It's like pretty big considering, I think it's like 65 square meters, which is pretty big considering Paris. It's almost like New York City in terms of apartment sizes here. And yeah, I think we're paying this month, it's probably 4,400 or 4,500, which is more than we were paying in Austin, but it's a short term, it's a month to month lease. And so
Yeah.
obviously, and it's furnished. And so obviously, we're going to be paying a little bit of a premium on that. So yeah, that's kind of the situation. It's a solid place. It's not super nice or anything like that, but it's in the right neighborhood, which is most important, and it's got space and it's fairly nice.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I like that breakdown because a lot of people that listen to this are into the credit card rewards, points and miles space. So they're always like, okay, how can I get a hotel? And I can tell you, you don't want to be staying a lot of the times in a hotel unless you have some sort of presidential upgraded suite. And usually that's going to be an arm and a leg. So always thinking through, right? Are there Airbnbs? There is a new company called Journey. It's co-advised through the Points guy. And the founder actually is here locally in Charlotte, who used to be the chief digital officer for Red Ventures. We're having him come on the podcast here soon. But what I like about it is it's boutique hotel focused, but at the same time, they have those experience type stays. So for your Airbnbs, and the thought process behind it is they'll have membership rewards that then you can start to stack. So if you do like to travel, and we'll learn a little bit more, it's not there yet, but if you start to have some credit card points, potentially utilizing them there because they saw a gap in the market where people who are loyal to, Hyatt, Marriott, Hilton, IHG, they're like, well, we like hotels, but we're now, we aren't traveling with two people, or, we're traveling like you guys are for a longer period of time, but we don't like the costs that come into it from an Airbnb standpoint. So having the points guy, as a co-advisor who's been doing this for right 20 plus years, being kind of that top name in the space, they then thought through, why don't we create something like this? So they're at that earlier stage, but excited to share exactly what they're doing because yeah, I think it's a need in the market, and as people grow, as they right, I think the challenge is people who travel on points credit cards. A lot of times they're either single, they're a couple, or they have one kid. But as families start to grow, I think people are starting to realize, and something I try to do is bring on parents who have done this for a while to be like, how do you do this? Like, I have friends who are now having kids and they're like, oh my God, travel is so stressful and this and that. So my goal is always like, all right, well, we don't have kids. So how do we bring on the right people to kind of talk through that and help people realize, hey, there's a bunch of different options that you can utilize outside of just the hotel loyalty programs, Airbnb, Verbo, and everything else.
Yeah, and now that we're getting to the meat of this conversation, I mean, frankly, Ross, for me, I'm novice when it comes to points. And so I told you when we talked
Yeah.
about doing the podcast, I'm like, I need some advice because for me, all of my personal spend goes onto my Apple Card, and I just use Apple Card because the user experience is really great. I like, the toggle to pay my bill and seeing all of my transactions. It's embedded in the wallet. So I use that out of default because the software is the best. And then on my business card, everything goes on my Brex, which is just the first credit card I got for the business. So I'm far from an optimized, points earner and points spender. I typically fly with United, but I don't have great status there, and I haven't figured out how to move points from,
Yeah.
one provider to another in order to maximize it. So I think, hopefully one day I'll get to a point where a lot of this travel is fully compensated through our credit card points. But right now it's I pay for the Airbnb on credit card and then I get points on that. Um, And sometimes I can redeem my Brex credit card points for Airbnb gift cards. I think they used to have Airbnb gift cards. Now it's just like a Visa gift card.
Yeah.
So in terms of, doing this the smart way, I claim to be no expert there. I'm
Yeah.
maybe an expert of how to find an apartment next to an office, next to a gym. But when it comes to paying for all of that on points, I have certainly not solved it.
Yeah, man. No, that's totally fine. You're building a business, right? Like that's not your goal. Your expertise is not supposed to be. I always like to use the analogy of right. A dentist and doctor don't go to school to be financial wizards, right? They go there to literally, if I'm coming into the ER, I need your help, right? Don't tell me what stock to invest in. I need you to sew me up. So no, I totally get that. Yeah, and I like to keep it super simple because once you get into the points game, you can go down a whole rabbit hole, and that's exactly what most people do. It's fun, but just to keep it very high level and simple, I always like to think of it through on your personal side, where are most of your expenses going to? And just getting, it just depends too, right? Like for you guys, since you're staying in Airbnbs, it doesn't make sense right now to have a hotel branded credit card and another points earning credit card. What would make the most sense for you guys is just having, you and if your wife or future wife wanted one, just having a card that you can use for your daily expenses. So for your Airbnbs, having something that's earning more on travel. So whether that's a Chase Sapphire Preferred or a Capital One Venture X, because you're getting those travel benefits, you're earning two, three times the points. I like the Capital One Venture X because you get two times the points on everything. You can then get a statement credit back. You can also, if you're spending a lot on those, you can, if this isn't the best way to optimize it, but some people like to do it, you can actually take those statement credits and put them back towards the Airbnb bill. But when you talk about transferable rewards, points, and miles, that's where Capital One, Chase, American Express come into play, where you can utilize those currencies to then transfer over to places like United, American, and then there's alliance partners, which are within, there's the Star Alliance, there's Sky Team, which think of it as Delta, and then you have the One World Alliance, which is American, but there's like 100 airlines within those alliances. That's where you start to see people, get those. Oh, I had, like, for example, we had a 100,000 point flight of Chase points, and that was a $5,600 business class flight on Qatar, and that's part of One World Alliance. So being able to utilize those points, we also used Capital One miles to do the same type of thing. So that's where you start to get those transferable currencies. So just to keep it super simple, like on the personal side, those are usually just entry level cards. And then on the business side, it's just thinking through, and that's, if you have a lot of employees, Brex can definitely be a good one. But it just depends on right what your spend is, what your goals are. If you're a solopreneur or don't have a ton of employees, again, going back to Amex, Chase, or Capital One, depending on right, is your spend on shipping, is your spend on e-com, on ads. Like we have a client who had a 350K ad spend a month and they were using just ACH because of their Google and Facebook terms. And they just didn't realize that they could keep the same terms, get additional time to pay off the card, and then start to earn three, four times the points uncapped on those certain categories. So that's where it's always just thinking through, hey, where is that spend? And where do you see that spend going? And then again, just going back to transferable currencies. But Brex and Ramp have come out and they definitely have just easy to use. But if you don't have a huge business with a ton of employees, those are the Capital One, Amex, Chase, and there's different cards in those platforms that, I recommend.
Yeah, and I think, to your point there about ad spend, I think that's where your service is so valuable to our community because like I said, we work with a couple thousand e-commerce brands. And if you look at the P&L of almost any e-commerce business, there's a ton of money going into advertising. And so which card to put it on, like step one, how do you get them to agree to go from ACH to credit card? Step two, once you can get it on credit card, what is the right credit card depending on your spend? Are
Hmm.
you spending 20,000 a month? Are you spending 200,000 a month? Or are you spending 2 million a month? And we have people in all of those categories. And so why don't you just tell me like really quickly, like at each of those ranges, let's say 20K, 200, and then north of that, what is generally the advice for e-commerce businesses that are spending on ads?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So if you're at that 20K threshold, I would recommend either the Amex Gold, because you get up to 4 times the points, up to 150K in ad spend. After you hit that threshold, you get 1 times the points. So if you just want something super simple, there it is uncapped. So it's what we call a charge card. So there's no preset spending limit. So you can, if you have, you know, $600,000 worth of ad spend, you can go up to that and there's no cap. The Chase Sapphire Business Reserve is great, but it's a good travel card and it has uncapped ad spend. So if you spend 1 million in ads, you get 3 times the points on all of that. The challenge there is Chase has credit limits. So in where you could spend, right, you have that no credit limit with a client that, right, the client example I just said that had 350K in ad, they only are able to get right around 100K credit limit. So then you're kind of toying and having to do mental gymnastics. So if you're willing to put in that extra work, that's an okay solution. So those are right there are the two main ones, from an ad spend if you're at that level. Once you start to get into the 200K, 2 million, Capital One Venture X business is great because you get 2 times the points on everything. There's no cap, there's no preset spending limit. So then you're able to, right, get just 2 times the points, keep it simple, and earn. Just say you have $1 million worth of spend, you're earning on ads, you're earning 2 million points a year, which I like to equate those to 2 times. So you're looking at around 40 grand worth of travel. And when I work with my clients, I try to get 3 to 5 times the points. So the example I gave earlier, that 100,000, you know, point sign up bonus from one of the business cards I got turned into a $5,600 flight. That is 5.6 times the point. So like that's when I work with clients in group coaching. Like that's what I aim to get them. If you're spending a ton of money too, on, if you're, because you don't really need over 10 million points, right? You're going to have to figure out how to use those. So once you get to that 10 million point threshold, that's then when we work directly with some of the banks and we set you up with an account management team that they can then help walk you through. So for example, at Capital One, they can then help say, you know what, Kenny, you have 50 million, you're spending $50 million. If you only want to have 10 million points, what do we want to do to give you more liquidity, more cash flow towards your bottom line? Cool. We have a short-term CD that you can put in there so you have extra liquidity so you can earn 4.2% on your interest, right? Or we have maybe it makes sense to get you a cash back card for this other stuff. So you're getting 2% cash back. So you're not only getting cash towards your bottom line, you're also getting some of those travel rewards so you can take your fiance, if you have a family, you can go travel for free, 5-star luxury. And that's the nice part is I get a question a lot of times like, well, am I going to go stay in this crappy hotel or I'm going to have to, right? Like, sure, it's free, but it's going to, right? It's one where I got to go to this sweaty timeshare presentation in the back of a room. No, it's like 5-star luxury resorts. We stayed in, a couple in Bali. That, I mean, they're amazing, right? They come and clean your room 4 times a day. Just the service is impeccable. So that's the best part is the majority of the places when people ask, hey, where should we go? I want to go here. Like I've been, and if not, I have some of the top CEOs, some of the top voices in the space come on the podcast who have all been there. So I know where are the best places to stay, what are the best flight routes. And that's our goal, right? When I help people out is just helping you get to those, aligning that credit card spend with where you want to go, and then just tying it off nicely. And if you're, a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know if I want to move from ACH to credit because of terms. A lot of times it's just asking or just looking more into those terms. The guys that I was working with just thought that because that's what they started out with, but it was totally fine. And with those cards, it gave some of them an extra with the Amex, it gave them an extra 30 days, right, on those because you have that statement. And then for the Chase, it gave them an extra their statement was at the end of the 28th, so they had another 58 days to then pay that off, right? So that's the nice part is you get a little bit of extra float. And that's yeah, I mean and if you have a fee, the 3% fee, that's a lot of developers, real estate guys I work with, GCs don't take, credit card. So a lot of the times it's one first asking, and if they don't, we have softwares that we recommend that you can use, and that's what I pay, right? If I'm doing any sort of real estate or paying personal, like if I have to go get, my a boat fixed and the guy doesn't take card, I use a different software to pay that. So I just look at it as, yes, I'm paying a 3% fee, but I'm getting transferable credit card currencies that are going to be significantly worth more, and that's going to pay for my travel or go to my bottom line.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And I think, there's so much conversation in the e-commerce world about credit cards and there's all different types of offers out there. So I think that, it's a really helpful educational space for folks who are thinking through all of this and they're like, do I optimize for payment terms? Do I optimize for points? And I think that when a lot of people are thinking about, hey, do I do something with maybe a better optimization for terms? That's because they're not considering what you said of 5.6 times or something like
Yeah,
that. Like
yeah.
if you're at 1% or whatever, then sure, it's probably not worth it if you have to give up some of those payment terms. But if you start increasing those multiples, then all of a sudden you may not want to optimize for a rolling, payback period or whatever that may be. So super, super interesting. And I appreciate you sharing that with me and us working together to get this out to more people that could use this service.
Yeah, 100%. And look, they make it complicated for a reason, right? The banks would be losing money if they didn't. But I mean, it took 10 plus years of traveling, planning trips, making the mistakes, right? Working, starting a business, having a real estate business, kind of understanding all those pain points, and doing that research and working with clients to understand like, hey, this is what you can do. And again, it's not the goal, it's not the job of whatever business owner, entrepreneur to go do all of that research and go down that rabbit hole, right? It's someone like myself who subscribes to 5 newsletters, listens to 4 different podcasts, right? Like has all the people who come on, and I get to learn for free when they come on and dive into those. So yeah, my suggestion would be, if you are interested, we have a free points and miles cheat sheet that'll get you started. We send out weekly newsletters that just walk you down that path of whatever situation you're in. And we give you the right tools just to set you up for success. It's not overwhelm. It really meets you where you're at. And yeah, the podcast, we bring on awesome guests like Kenny to share their experiences, and we go deeper into the points and miles side of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah,
man.
and from my perspective, and being a business strategist and being in the perspective of an advisor, oftentimes, I think most great advisors would tell you you need to focus on the core competency of your business and focus on your competitive advantage. And frankly, in a lot of cases, outsource everything else.
Yeah.
And as an e-commerce business, I don't think that your core competency needs to be, optimizing credit card points. And so I think you need to focus on, how to acquire customers, how to retain customers, how to build product innovation, and work with Ross when it comes to how to get the most out of your credit card points. Don't spend all of your time doing the research yourself. In the spirit of MentorPass, pay the expert and get access to the expert and let him, do it for a lot cheaper and get you better results. So I think your service is great and something that, when I first talked to you, I said it's like it's somewhat unique. I don't see a lot of people with this kind of productized service to come into companies and help them, get a better return on their spend. So I think you've got a great business and looking forward to seeing it grow.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. You mentioned one thing. If you have an assistant too, that's perfect because, right, like if they're the ones doing all the travel stuff, they can literally learn everything that I've done and do it for you. And you get to focus on the business and you get to show up at all the places that have been booked out. And we also leverage AI and know how to use those tools. So we'll also build out specific agents, those type of things as those are getting more and more prominent. So that's the beauty of it. So no, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, Kenny. Is there any other just one piece of advice that you'd leave people with outside of, right, coming to me from a point standpoint, but just from Mentor Pass, from if someone's an early stage entrepreneur, or if they're just right struggling in their business, anything that you guys could do to help.
So I'll share what I'm really focusing on right now. And that's just to, go bigger, and go all in. And I heard this when I was early on in my journey, and I don't think I really internalized it until more recently. But you're gonna work all the time. It's gonna be really hard. It's gonna take a lot of time and energy. So you might as well focus on doing something really big, because the difference between doing something really big and doing something really small is not that much. It's a lot different in terms of results, but it's not a lot different in terms of time and energy and difficulty. You're going to spend all your time working regardless. And so you might as well spend that time working on something really big, really important, push yourself to go bigger, push yourself to go harder, and really the sky's the limit. And that's just the kind of reminder I'm giving myself right now is it's time to go all in. It's time to, the time is now. You can't keep pushing it down the road. This is the moment. So, I can't really call it advice. It's just, I'll kind of give reminder to self that I'll say out loud.
It's words of wisdom, and it's just motivation to end people when they get off when they get off listening to this. So
the time is now.
Yeah,
this is the time. You got to go for it. No more waiting. No more pushing it down the road. You got to hit the gas.
I appreciate it. No, that's great. Where can our listeners find you, Kenny?
I'm on Instagram, Kenny Hansen. I'm on X, at Kenny Hansen, or no code Kennedy. Kenny is the handle. So, or reach out to me on Instagram or X. I'm always happy to chat.
Cool. Yeah, and we'll share your links in the show notes and Mentor Pass as well. But again, really appreciate you coming on here. And listeners, if this is your first time, make sure you give us a follow or subscribe. That way you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. If you thought this episode deserves a 5-star review, make sure you give it one. That way it helps us grow the show. I think Kenny deserved one. So appreciate everyone tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Really appreciate you tuning in today. Before you go, again, if you're new here, grab my free 5-step roadmap to your next free 5-star luxury vacation and the one card that gets you there in the show notes. The main takeaway from today is you don't need more time or money to travel better. You just need a simple plan and the right strategy in place. My final thought is travel's supposed to feel exciting, not overwhelming. Take one thing you learned today, apply it this week, and your next trip gets easier starting now. We'll see you next episode. Really appreciate you tuning in.